Imagine this. A doctor, someone who has sworn an oath to heal, is watching a prisoner's arms freeze completely solid, and then he strikes them with a stick just to see if the flesh will shatter like glass. No, this wasn't some scene from a horror movie. This was a real scientific experiment. It was the work of Unit 731, Imperial Japan's top-secret biological warfare division during World War II. It's a story of calculated cruelty, a story that's been almost completely overshadowed by what happened in Europe, a chapter of history that was deliberately buried for decades. So, in this explainer, we are going to pull back the curtain. We're going to uncover how all of this happened, why it was kept hidden for so long, and what it tells us about the terrifying place where science, war, and morality collide. Welcome to Veiled Histories. Now, to really understand this story, we're not going to start at the beginning. No, we're going to start at the absolutely shocking end, with the architects of this horror just walking free after the war. This quote, it really cuts right to the heart of it. See, as soon as Japan surrendered, the world was already pivoting to a new conflict, the Cold War. And because of that, a geopolitical calculation was made, a calculation that would completely override any sense of morality or justice. And here it is. The United States secretly gave full immunity from war crimes prosecution to this man, Surgeon General Shiro Ishii. He was the commander of Unit 731. He and all his top researchers, they were never even put on trial for what they did. Which, of course, brings us to the central question of this whole thing. What research, what data, could possibly be so valuable that it was worth letting actual monsters walk free? To answer that, we have to go inside the walls of Unit 731's main facility in occupied China. And you have to understand, this was no ordinary research center. It was a human laboratory. The very first step in their whole process was total dehumanization. The prisoners, who were mostly Chinese, but also Russians, Koreans, and even some allied POWs, they were given a code name, Maruta. It means logs. They weren't seen as people anymore. They were just raw material, something to be experimented on and then disposed of. And the experiments, they were the stuff of nightmares. Prisoners were vivisected, cut open while still alive and conscious, just to study their organs. Limbs were amputated and sometimes even reattached to the opposite side of the body. They were deliberately infected with the plague, with anthrax, with cholera. They were used as living targets to test grenades and flamethrowers. And this was done to men, women, and yes, even to children. But this research, it didn't just stay in the lab. The whole point was to weaponize these diseases. And this brings us to the city of Ningbo, where Unit 731's science was unleashed on a completely unsuspecting civilian population. Just look at this timeline. It shows the terrifying speed of the attack. On October 27, 1940, Japanese planes flew low over Ningbo. They didn't drop bombs. They dropped a mixture of grain and cotton that was infested with plague-carrying fleas. Only 3 days later, a deadly outbreak began. The local response was just desperate. They built a massive wall to try and quarantine the district, but the plague kept spreading. So finally, in a last-ditch effort, they burned the entire infected area to the ground. And the total cost of this one single operation? According to data from Unit 731's own researchers, an estimated 1,554 people died from the initial attack and the infections that followed. The trauma was so deep, so lasting, that for decades after the war, the locals just called that area the plague field, a permanent scar on their city and in their memories. You know, the story of Ningbo, it's just one of countless atrocities that powerful forces tried to bury. And here at Veiled Histories, our entire mission is to unearth them. If you believe these stories must not be forgotten, you can help us by liking this explainer and subscribing. It ensures this history reaches the light and stays there. So this brings us back to that post-war deal. I mean, how could the United States possibly justify protecting the men responsible for an attack like the one on Ningbo? Well, the answer lies in the dawning of the Cold War. The contrast here is just stark. The Soviet Union, who had captured some of Unit 731's lower-ranking members, they held public war crimes trials in 1949. They exposed the whole biological warfare program. The United States, on the other hand, chose a very different path. They secretly offered immunity to the leadership, to Ishii himself, in exchange for exclusive access to all their data because they were terrified the Soviets might get it first. And their justification was chillingly pragmatic. American officials in their internal documents called the data absolutely invaluable. And why? Because, and they admitted this kind of research could never be conducted in the US because of, quote, scruples attached to experiments on humans. They were literally trading justice for forbidden knowledge. But here is the most damning twist of all. The very same internal US documents that called the research invaluable also concluded that a lot of it was scientifically useless, that it was poorly conducted, and strategically it was pointless. The great moral compromise was made for data that was largely worthless. So while the perpetrators walked free, and the victorious powers sorted through their horrific files, the victims, they were left with wounds, both physical and historical, that have never, ever truly healed. The words of this survivor, He Fuxin, are just a haunting reminder of that ongoing suffering. He describes this rotten leg disease, which was likely from anthrax weapons, that killed most of his family and afflicted him personally for 60 years. For thousands of people, the war never really ended. And the fight for just a simple acknowledgement of what happened was a brutal, decades-long battle. For years, Japan's government officially denied that its bioweapons program even existed. It wasn't until 1981 that a book finally broke the story to the Japanese public. And it took until 2002, after years and years of lawsuits by victims, for a Tokyo court to finally admit the truth, even as it refused to give any compensation. And here is the final, bitter injustice of it all. Not only did the leaders of Unit 731 escape punishment, many of them went on to have incredibly distinguished careers. They became deans of medical schools, heads of pharmaceutical companies. Some even worked for Japan's Ministry of Health. The very men who turned medicine into an instrument of torture became pillars of the post-war medical establishment. Ultimately, the story of Unit 731 isn't just about the past. It's a permanent warning. It forces every one of us to confront the darkest capabilities of science when it's completely severed from ethics, from accountability, and from basic human morality. And it leaves us with this profound, really uncomfortable question that, honestly, we're still grappling with today. When knowledge is born from pure atrocity, what is our duty to that data? And maybe more importantly, what is our debt to the dead?